fact. But I mean, the Democrats sometimes can take it too far. Or I would categorize liberal as different than woke. Woke, which started out as a good thing, alert to injustice. Who could be against that? But it became sort of an eye roll because they love diversity except of ideas. And that's not really where we should be. I mean, they have a trail of very bad ideas, I would think, in wokeness. Like,
how do you define wokeness? Because I hear people use the term all the time, and it means something different to everybody.
Well, again, I think it's this collection of ideas that are not building on liberalism, but very often undoing it. I mean, 5 years ago, Abraham Lincoln was not a controversial figure among liberals. We liked him. Now they take his name off schools and tear down his statues. Really? Lincoln isn't good enough for you?
That was Bill Maher on CNN last night, I believe, being interviewed at great length about his views on a variety of subjects. They eventually talk about Donald Trump, and Bill Maher says that he's personally afraid of Donald Trump, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, he talked a lot about what he does on his own show, which is a lot of bashing of wokeness, cancel culture, identitarianism. I tend to agree with the things he says on this subject. You can try to poke holes in one thing or another, but he usually presents what I think are transparently ridiculous kind of things to make fun of in the cancel culture category. What, Briahna? What?
Okay.
What?
So I think it's fascinating that he wants to draw a distinction between wokeness and liberalism, when liberalism is literally the thing that made what the original definition of woke was, which was a good thing, as he says there, into the perverse monstrosity that it is now. And the problem with liberalism, he says that there's a deficit of ideas. That is fundamentally a liberal problem. Liberalism is subsuming what used to be ideas, critical thinking, material analysis, economic progressivism that tried to make the world better and more equal, into a superficial version of identity politics that takes the identity as a good in and of itself instead of using it as an axis along which you can identify the concerns that people are suffering from and figuring out a way to address them materially, meaning economically. And so for him to say, well, that's wokeness, no, that's literally liberalism. And what you should be talking about, the deficit of ideas, is the fact that liberalism, Democrats, have rested on their laurels of simply signaling, hey, we're the party that isn't mean to gay people or black people, so that's how we distinguish ourselves from the Republicans.
I think that's what he's saying wokeness is.
No, he's not. What he is.
Yes, he is.
No. He is the ideas are the same ideas that he craps on every time there's an election season and someone who actually is an economic populist raises them. If he cared about ideas and not superficial identity politics, he would have been all on board with a candidate like my former boss, Bernie Sanders, who talked not a whit about wokeness, got bulldozed by the liberal media, of which he is a fan and a part, of which Bill Maher is a fan and a part, for not being sufficiently woke, for not saying words like intersectionality.
I don't adjudicate how hostile he may have been to Bernie Sanders. I don't quite recall. He said he's going to have him on the show.
You can't sit here and say that you care about the lack of ideas when you have rejected.
I don't think you can sit here and say that liberalism mandates a kind of the sort of wokeness that wants to categorize everyone by their overlapping hierarchy of intersectional oppression. And liberalism is
what's left? What's his version of liberalism? Because it doesn't include the left.
Individual rights.
So let's talk about that. So again, let's come back to this deficit of ideas point. His evidence for there being fewer ideas in today's world is that someone like Abraham Lincoln was considered to be a less complicated figure 5-10 years ago than they are today. Now, you can take issue with that. You could say people shouldn't criticize Lincoln. People shouldn't have a historical analysis of Lincoln that includes all of the diverse opinions that he held at the day, that we should ignore those things and whitewash him and just consider him a very...
That's not what he's saying. He's saying...
Well, what is he saying?
He's saying it's transparently ridiculous to say you are psychologically harmed and traumatized by attending a school where Robby, it was named after Lincoln and you have to rename it.
Let's talk about what he was actually talking about in that clip.
Well, that's what he means.
I didn't hear anything about psychologically harmed by a school. He talked about the fact that 5 years ago, Lincoln was not a complicated figure, and today he is a complicated figure. Now, you can disagree with that, but that is nothing if not ideas. And what he is arguing for in that clip that we just watched is a suppression, frankly, of new ideas, whether or not you like them, that interrogate
the new
way
ideas
that we
are
have
trying to suppress are trying to say that.
If you want to bring up a particular school, and I don't know about that example, but I completely believe you. If there's a particular school that says they want to change their name or that they don't want to study Lincoln at all, no. I think you can change the name of the school. People change the name of schools all the time. That's not a big deal. But if you're saying, I don't want to talk about Abraham Lincoln anymore, let's pretend that Abraham Lincoln didn't exist, let's erase him from the history books because I don't like his attitudes towards slavery, then I would say, yeah, that's stupid and that's a suppression of ideas. But that is not, in fact, what Bill Maher just said in that clip. But what he criticized in that clip, Robby, come on, you know what he just said. He said that there was a flat consensus about what Lincoln was and who he was 5 years ago that doesn't exist today, and that rankles him.
Okay, I wrote about this, and I remember that I believe Bill Maher covered it on his show. There was a George Washington High School in San Francisco that wanted to spend $600,000 to cover up a mural of George Washington because of problematic stuff. That's the kind. Well, it's those kinds of things.
That's not Lincoln. But you can't.
That's an example.
Look, Bill Maher is a TV professional.
And there's hundreds of these examples.
He's a TV professional who's being brought on a CNN roundtable or whatever this is to give his theory as to why wokeness is a problem. He was asked for an example, and that's the example that he went to. And this is part and parcel of the problem. Because when you bring out these outlier examples, Robby, everyone agrees.
Well,
wait a minute. This is the problem. Everybody agrees that a school that has a funding issue shouldn't spend $600,000 doing anything that's not teaching students and funding faculty and getting healthy food maybe in
that's the problem with the philosophy. It's a philosophy of harm to people based on being triggered or traumatized. And in fact, probably like one person ever complained. Maybe no one complained. Maybe the DEI board said this was problem. Maybe they just came out of a Robin DiAngelo seminar and decided of their own volition without any student having said anything. That's you can call it whatever you want.
Yeah.
If you don't like the name wokeness, we don't have to call it that. We just need a name for that thing that we all agree is dumb and bad and is hurting our society and our discourse, and we want to abolish it.
But that's the problem.
You get upset that it's called wokeness. I don't have any investment in calling it wokeness. We'll call it something else.
I'm not disagreeing
Whatever
with
you want to call it, it's
wokeness.
fine.
I haven't once quibbled with the term wokeness. What I'm quibbling with is the framing of him as an outlier, free thinker, who's the only one, or some minority of persecuted, or some like silent majority of people who has a problem with this, when literally everybody has a problem with this. We talked about this on the show yesterday with Whoopi Goldberg, who had a problem with the censorship of James Bond books. Because when you take these crazy examples, literally everyone feels the same way about it. This isn't a right-left issue. This isn't an elite. The only distinction that maybe exists, to your point, is that there are weird DEI people who make a lot of money selling books about white fragility, who push this stuff to absurd conclusions. But what Bill Maher and what I'm afraid happens is when he does what he did in this clip. I'm talking. This is like a what do you call it? Textual analysis. This is a primary document we're dealing with here, and I want to stay within the four corners of this document. What he is doing there is taking a real phenomenon that people are mad about, describing it in such vague and overly expansive terms, and frankly misapplying it to a different context, talking about, well, now nobody likes Abraham Lincoln, which is just fundamentally not even true, to make it seem like the world has gone crazier than it is and that there's more division than there actually is. And I think that is toxic and dangerous. It's divisive and along the lines of what he complains about Donald Trump. But that's exactly the same kind of dividing the country up and getting us at each other's throats that got us into that particular quagmire.
If I was sitting where he was sitting and I was being asked by Jake Tapper, I would say, I'm defining wokeness as this bureaucratic tyranny coming from these DEI training consultant activist organizations that seem particularly influential in some education settings, some corporate settings, and are having like a wildly disproportionate impact on what you're allowed to like say and do in schools, in the workplace, on campuses, that no real people actually agree with or think is good, but does have real world implications that people get fired or expelled or put through ridiculous kind of training or investigations over nonsense. Some of it relates to Title IX and other titles. And it's bad, and we all think it's bad, and we should like stop ceding power to these people we all think are crazy. That's how I would define it.
And I would agree with that, but I wouldn't start hopping and skipping that to saying you're not allowed to be critical of our former presidents. am I not allowed to mention that Abraham Lincoln's wooden teeth were in fact slaves' teeth? Or is that like too triggering for a snowflake like Bill Maher? Is that a historical fact that should be erased from the books, even though it's only just been put into the public knowledge in the last 10,
I have lots of
20 years or
criticisms
so?
of Lincoln, by the way. I've never said Lincoln is my favorite president.
You know, are we allowed? I mean, I know you've disagreed with him, you know, suspending habeas corpus, and there are things that you have issues with.
He implemented the draft. He was the president that invented the draft.
So, like, is that the kind of, you know, woke critique we're not allowed to say anything? Or is it what the real concern is, that people don't like having a critique of a lot of past figures, particularly racial policies, that are characterized, they're often characterized by folks like Bill Maher as anachronistic. It's not fair to judge him by that standard. Okay, you don't have to. But I think it's also perfectly reasonable. People can judge. The teaching isn't the judging. You're allowed to say true things about what people's political positions were on all kinds of issues, including race, gender, whatever else was going on. And let people interpret those as they will. And I think the lesson should be not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but also not to be so paranoid about nuance and have enough confidence in people's being able to appreciate and interpret nuance, that you don't try to do the other thing, which is what we've been doing for the entire history of this country, which is whitewash a lot of those historical figures and tell a very limited version of who they actually were.
Yeah, I definitely don't think they should be whitewashed. They weren't whitewashed during my education. I don't think kids should have an educational experience where
You didn't learn
they're not
about Washington's
interrogated.
wooden teeth?
What?
You weren't told as a kid that George Washington had wooden teeth?
Yeah, I knew he had wooden teeth.
Nobody didn't. They were slave teeth.
Washington or Lincoln?
Washington.
Oh, I thought you said Lincoln. Okay.
No, Washington. I think that Lincoln had his own teeth.
Okay. That just went all over the place. We'll have more Rising right after this.